Welcome to Simply by Deal HQ. On this podcast, we engage thought leaders on topical issues around law and business in the most simplistic manner.
Ho ho ho, indeed it's the season to be jolly. Welcome to episode 11 and the Utah edition of Simply by Deal HQ. Here's wishing all our listeners and members of the Simply community very happy holidays. We thank you for keeping faith with us from the beginning of the year. On this episode, we will be talking about financial exclusion in Africa and looking at this primarily through a gender lens. It is therefore no surprise that our guest today is a certified financial education instructor and founder of Harvest, social enterprise providing financial inclusion for women through a gender lens approach. Dolape, we're excited to have you on the final episode of Simply for 2022. On a lighter note, what is your best Christmas carol of all time?
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure being here, Marinari. And, there are quite a few of them that comes to mind. Thinking about them reminds me of my childhood. So actually, and I always say that Christmas is best enjoyed as a child. So I think I'll just stick with Ding Dong Merrily on, right? Yeah, let's go with that.
Okay, so we're going to open the show with a very short recording of Ding Dong Merrily on High.
Okay.
Many have posited that digital access and fintech adoption will be the biggest enabler of financial inclusion in Africa. The continent is now home to over 5,200 digital financial products, more than the level of deployment in any other part of the world. Whilst recording unprecedented numbers of users, Africa is responsible for almost half of the nearly 700 million users of digital financial services globally. Despite this record, there's an alarming about 32% gap in the level of adoption between male and female users. On today's episode, we will be taking a deep dive into the cause and effect of this gender gap, its impact on the overall economic development of the continent, and how social inclusion can be directed towards leveling access. First and foremost, why is the conversation on gender gap in access to finance timely and critical?
Well, it's timely and critical because, as you know, no nation, no set of people thrives without, access to capital. Capital is key. Capital is king. As it is, it's usually scarce, right? And so when you now realize that, yes, in the midst of that scarcity, it's a double whammy, for about half of the entire population. it becomes a critical challenge, because what it then means is that where, so I'm talking in the context of economies now, where economies should be running, and you do that with both legs, right? Economies are hopping literally, because half, do not have equal access, to financial services. And I'm talking about financial services in a broad spectrum of, not just banking, which is, really critically key, but you're talking about other financial services, pension, insurance, retirement planning, wealth and asset management, and all of that. But let's even limit it to bank and, the basics of banking, which is, money deposits and then, credit. How many women get access to credit? Let's bring it down to Nigeria, our country, their home country, and look at the requirements to get basic credit and how many of these can women, fulfill. So yes, it's just purely so when I have these conversations, I always say that it's not a gender conversation, it's an economic conversation. It's an economic imperative, because when half of humanity, when half of the population do not have equal access, to finance, the other half loses altogether, right? And so it is a critical conversation to be, for us to have now, and beyond the conversations, to act upon. And that's what I've dedicated the past few years to, saying that we should equalize opportunities, we should make it a level playing field, for both genders to access quality financial service. To dimension this and put it in context, I'll just give you some few examples with the women we work with and what we've seen on the field. Going back to credit point, any bank, any financial institutions will require to see, and that's how it should be in most cases, would require to see your transactional history. How have you been doing with money? They'll require some form of guarantee for the funds. So in terms of viewing transactional history, a lot of women do not even have basic banking accounts. These are evidenced in statistics and numbers, by the way. And so where a woman who's just been doing cash in, cash out cannot even, share a sample or share a track of how she's been keeping money, of course, she's been systemically exempted, from further opportunities like credit, or other guarantees that she might need capital for. In terms of, guarantee, that is collateral. Most of the time, collaterals that are accepted are, basically properties, landed properties. And in some cultures where women cannot even inherit properties, like their male siblings from their parents, again, another systemic exemption. And look at financial literacy as well, which, research surveys had evidence that a lot of women lack more financial literacy compared to their male counterparts. And so on the long run, you realize the lack of education, that is broad education and financial education, inequality in income, right? And different elements just come together to evidence that women are poorly adopting financial services, and it is impacting them and impacting the economy altogether. And so it is quite critical, that we address the economic gender gap across the world, because it isn't, I always say, it's a global thing. It's just that it's more acute in Africa, which makes it a continental challenge for Africa, and then it's even deeper in our home country, because Nigeria is the only West African country on the financial inclusion priority list. Ghana was on that list before, but of course Ghana had been able to close that gap to a certain extent. So you have countries like Nigeria, Bangladesh, and India still on that list, where women, you have more and more women not consuming financial services as much as their male counterpart. So it's a critical conversation.
Thank you for that. And you've already begun to discuss some of the things that are in my next question, but I would like to tell us a bit more about the work you do in Harvest. So what products do you have for women? And, when you started up the business, why did you focus on gender lens investing?
Yes, as I'd established, in my former answer, established the challenges and all of that. I was enjoying my job as head of marketing at an investment firm, one of the top investment firms some 2 years back, which of course gave me a lot of insight into this economic gender gap, which I was very, very keen about solving. I had started, researching, reading, doing a lot of, underground background work since 2015 on this. And I realized that a lot of work had been done, actually. A lot of work had been done. And when I say a lot of work, I mean research, white papers. And they were just kept free. And so I thought to myself that for people to have done this amount of work and no one is critically addressing it, it must be, really, really hard work, really. And I decided that, well, if no one would do it, I would do it. And that was how Harvest came to be, to say that we need to tackle, equalizing financial access and inclusion with a gender lens perspective, through a gender lens investing approach. And, we started and began to dig deeper and realized that the problem was even less about all of this access. Yes, they are huge problems, but the underlying problem was economic empowerment, right? A woman can simply not save what she doesn't have, right? Someone who doesn't even know what's possible might not even yearn for empowerment, because every day she probably doesn't see beyond, basic things like feeding, healthcare is even a luxury and all of that. So she probably is not. Why would she dare so much to dream? And then, she probably just feels cut off and on the fringes of a great livelihood. And that was how we had to really push most of our activities into the rural areas, into rural Nigeria, to see how we can work with these women and bridge the gaps through blended financing, which we did with training them, giving them access to funding and giving them access to markets. So broadly, what Harvest does is our mission is improving women's lives through greater access to and use of financial services. And so we go further to, give women from rural areas, as we said, who are usually financially excluded, and women who are financially underserved, who are probably in urban or peri-urban areas, access to help each other. As a cooperative, we contribute and then, invest in each other via the areas that I've said, open them up for further partnerships where they can, sell their produce, get them access to technical assistance, ensure that there's financial literacy, custom-built, language-based across both the women on the demand side, as we put it, which is the rural women, and the supply side, which are women in peri-urban and urban areas. And you realize that with that, peer-to-peer upward movement, there's elevation on both sides, and participations are being lifted. And it's an unfolding story. So basically now Harvest, with that core focus, to be able to, we have over 30,000, about 35,000 women in our network at the moment. And with that, it's achieving that balance, we intend to expand and scale that solution across more women in Nigeria and, of course, outside the country.
Okay, I just want to mention that is an impressive figure, the women you have in your network at the moment.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so the thing is, right now, technology is being vastly adopted in Africa, and we know that it is both a leveler and an enabler. So one would expect that these dated conversations around gender gaps would have been vastly reduced due to, high level of adoption of digital financial services in Africa. Why do you reckon there's still low adoption, by women? Are there underlying positive factors?
Yes, as I mentioned, can you save what you do not? It's not possible. It's a game of nickel and dime, right? You can only consider saving away. You can only consider, getting a pension plan or even insuring. All of those are luxuries. Someone whose primary task is surviving and feeding every day. And with the with more and more not just women now, but more and more citizens being pushed beneath the poverty line, And permit me to say that with more and more representatives of this being female, because you realize that more women are becoming, providers for their families. Not by choice, but, as they say, statistically, a woman turns back about 90% of whatever income that she gets into the family, right? So it is more dampening on their financial, capabilities. So it's not a case of financial tools alone. Are the financial tools enabling them to get more income? That's the first question. Or the financial tools are just there to help with cash in, cash out transactions. Another mistake that we've done in all of this is to swap or assume that financial inclusion is synonymous to payment inclusion. So you realize that with mobile money agents in the past years, it had significantly gone up for good. We appreciate it. Created jobs for a few, right? And of course, also, where it has increased convenience, but it's, cash transactions have become, a tad more expensive for people. So you see someone just go to a POS agent and withdraw 10,000 for 200 naira, where they could have gone to, maybe an ATM and withdraw for that convenience. So, but of course, they've acquired more cost in accessing their cash. So, if you look at all of this, they've got their perks. It's quite applauded. But again, how much are we building, digital financial rails that expand income capacities for these women? And I'll tell you a few of things that we've done. When we initially started, we were going into communities physically, manually, aggregating women in collectives and numbers. And we knew that this is not scalable. Yes, there's need for that touch factor where you identify the leaders of the communities, religious, and all of that. But hey, to scale, how can a woman whoever has not visited a community, reach out to say, I want to belong to this community, I want to, I want to access credit, I want to save away, I want to get access to the market that you give, I want to get access to the technical assistance that you give. So we developed a USSD that allows any woman to do that now. And alongside that, we also built a curriculum alongside the 3 value chains that we, fund at the moment for our smallholder female farmers. I'm sorry, I think I didn't mention that early enough, that in talking about rural women, we primarily, for now, look at smallholder female farmers because most of these women are agrarian, by the way. So for the value chains that we, focus on, which are sorghum, rice, and maize, we have, a curriculum domiciled on their phone that is, just dial the code and then you're able to see all you require to know. And we keep updating all of this. So that's already expanding and giving you fingertips knowledge. And when you need to access credit, you can make requests, you can deposit, you can do your cash in, cash out. So you've got to just expand leverage on technology systems, on technology itself, not just to transact, but to expand capacity. Because like I said, what we do not exactly talk mostly about is that financial empowerment, economic empowerment is the virus itself. All other things are symptoms. Women are not adopting financial services enough. They are symptoms. If a woman has enough, she's able to deploy and display, financial transactions in a digitized way. As women are now, they now have a vest wallet. You can see how they, you can see transactions for a few months, and you can make judgments on that to say they deserve credit or not. So, financial services significantly help, but again, like I said, we should critically, we should lean in more and do harder work. It's more work, but it's essential because, like I believe what is worth doing at all is worth doing well. And I believe together with the right partners, with conversations like this, we can do it all together.
The CBN this year announced that Nigeria has achieved an unprecedented 64% financial inclusion, and it targets 95% as of 2024. Bear in mind, we're at the end of 2024. What are your thoughts on this? Given your work in the field, does this data align with the practical realities that you see on ground?
Yes, so that's a block number. We do not have the breakdown of, how that fared for male against female. And I can assure you that if you break down the number, you realize that you still have more men, being included in that number compared to women. Interestingly, I belong to a body that is at the CBN itself, which is a committee. Yes, the committee is Framework for Advancing Women's Financial Inclusion in Nigeria. FOFIN was established in 2020, and conversations are constantly ongoing. Right? We have different streams there, and we discuss leveraging available models, partnerships to support tailored products and services. We have targets with all of this. My point is, because even the Apex Bank realized this gap, while looking at financial inclusion as a block itself, they had to look at it from a gender perspective, which is quite commendable. So 94% is a great number, but in its breakdown, what's the what's the word now? When you look at it male to female, what are the numbers looking like?
Sorry. Just to clarify, it's 64% at the moment, and they are 64. Looking to make it to 95 in 2024.
Okay, beautiful. So, like I said, if there was no gendered lens perspective to this, we would then say, oh, it's got to be done. But like I said, it's already ongoing. I'm a part of that conversation myself. I'm on the committee. So again, another thing that I've reiterated several times is that when we consider financial inclusion, what are we looking at? Most of the time, we're talking about opening a bank account. It's great, but I think if you ask me, I'll dimension that, under access, right? But inclusion in itself, how are we tracking if people are using these accounts at all? Are we tracking if they are adopting other layers of financial services? Pension and insurance, most importantly. I keep talking about this. So, these are conversations that, are unfolding, and we need to constantly and consistently assess, because it doesn't stop as just opening, a bank account. Talking about the targeted numbers, well, I would say that it's quite audacious. With the right resources, partnerships, deployed, it might be achievable. And even if it's not achieved, at least anything that falls within the radar, will be quite impressive and useful for all of us.
Okay. So what role do you think founders and social innovators have to play in, bridging the gender divide and, increasing digital financial services adoption, by women?
I think it is just for a lot of us to, be more creative and innovative. It's quite hard, trust me, because you don't want to, on one hand, you would be like, you would ask questions like, okay, does this mean that we now have to treat women differently, or lower the lower terms, maybe credit terms? There are different questions that ask. I would just say broadly that there's nothing that innovation with a heart doesn't solve. Like one of my mentors would say, if you look at a problem long and hard enough, with the heart to solve it, and with enough creativity and compassion in your heart, you find a solution around it. And innovation, like I always say, doesn't have to be something entirely new. It doesn't have to be like, a big bang. But at times, it's just about moving different things around. Instead of the horse coming before the cart, what about moving? You just have to move things around in a creative way to solve for people who, either due to, societal constructs, cultural reasons, religious reasons in some ways, have just been systemically exempted and gotten their access reduced to some basic financial services or some basic financial services terms, right? So we can walk around all of this for for greater good. So it's just for us all to have an open mind.
Some schools of thought have argued that one of the reasons why gender parity and financial inclusion has been impaired, despite the expansion and growth of digital financial services on the continent, is because many of the products being developed for the market are likely gender biased. Some will even say that, the low number of female founders coming out of Africa would likely have, solved the product development problem and the gender bias in the development stage. What is your take on this?
You see, it's no news that we have, lesser female founders globally. We have fewer female founders. And I wouldn't even blame this, on the world, or on the society. I just think this is where, those self-limiting biases come to play, because you have different types of biases. You have the external one, you have the one that you probably internalized, or the one that you just put on yourself by yourself. It's not really hard seeing a man, saying, you know what, I just want to chase my goals, my dreams. I want to build something. I think I can change the world through this startup, through this idea, and all of that. But you rarely find a female saying the same. There are, but in terms of numbers and representations, is quite low. That being said, I do not think that it's only females that can deploy, gender lens investment, or gender lens, or femtech, like we call it, product alone. Case in point is my co-founder Yomi Ogunleye, who is absolutely sold to the Harvest Dream in terms of engineering and product. He's constantly pushing, thinking of our community members, how they'll be able to relate to this, what we should do, right? So he's a guy, but he understands the problem and is ready to tackle it. Yes, there's the part of implicit bias where women are able to feel stronger towards the problem and understand the problem more, and then be able to solve it better. I'll just say that overall, we I'd like to, I don't know, anyone might be out there listening to this, and if there is truly that thing that you want to solve, especially looking at the challenges we've discussed, there are just too many. When I talk about financial inclusion, when I talk about the unequal access, I always say that they are symptoms of so many hyper-connected issues. You can't look at this without looking at, girls out of school, maternal health, gender-based violence, income inequality, time poverty. There are just too many issues. There are too many problems out there, affecting women, that I think that more women can come out, and solve brilliantly, for good. So if this is a charge, this is a clarion call, to have more women, on board solving for good. For instance, I've been into a lot of organizations, a lot of conferences, accelerators, where I'm the only female. I'm not just the only female, but the only Black female. It would be great to have, yes. It would be great to have, and this happens. I mean, it's happened a lot. Initially, it was strange. After a while, I started getting used to it. But then, I just wished, and I still am encouraged, that we need more female representatives across board who are solving groundbreaking work. Because again, imagine me at such tables and I'm speaking to some of the biases, some of the challenges plaguing, maybe my continent or my country, and it's like a lone voice. There's no endorsement, right? There's no endorsing voice. There's no corroborating voice, and it really in itself is not exactly fun. So I'm charging women. It's tough. It's a tough field. But it can be done, and you have enough support. Well, I'm not saying you have building support. The support there are more women in VC now. There are more women focused accelerators. I just came out of one, from VC4A, focusing on women founders. So a lot more people are moving the needle faster, for us female founders. So it's a good time, to come participate, look into a problem, equip and empower yourself on how to solve it. It's a continuous process, but it definitely can be done.
Finally, congratulations are in order. You recently launched a book, Stripped, which you have tagged the African Woman's Guide to Building Generational Wealth. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we imagine that some of our listeners would want to hear something about this book. So could you just share little details about it?
Oh well, Stripped, that's my first book. It took me 14 active months to do that, but it had to be done. And I'll tell you the insights behind that. Whenever I talk about personal finance, financial literacy, the imbalance and all of that, you have people say, oh, so Shalako, you've mentioned this, you've discussed the problems. How then do we proceed to make more money? How then do we, adopt more financial services? And, when those questions come, I probably have maybe 10 minutes, maybe 20 minutes to speak, and I cannot cover enough. And I saw the, hunger to do better. I saw the zeal to do better financially from these women. And that was it. I love writing, actually. I started my career as a copywriter, before I went into marketing, advertising, and then, tech finance and all of that. So Stripped essentially is to take a lesser view at, unbundling the biases that has held a lot of African women, especially, from participating actively in financial services, and then giving a step-by-step practical guide, towards how they can overcome all of this. And that's building wealth, but not just wealth, but generational wealth. And that's why, in the course of this conversation, for instance, I mentioned and said, we look at opening bank accounts. Is that sufficient? How does that preserve even what you have, right? How does it grow what you've made? So Stripped is essentially looked at the biases, the challenges, and how African women can create, grow, and preserve generational wealth for themselves and for generations to come. I encourage everyone. I've had men read Stripped and tell me, it's so helpful, Shalakwe. And a lot of women nationally, internationally, are getting their copies. It's available on Roving Heights in Nigeria and on Amazon for the ebook and the paperback, anywhere you are, on the globe. I poured my heart into that book, trust me, and the reviews have been, fantastic. I'm glad for people who have picked copies and read, and I encourage more people to do themselves and people around them that favor to get a copy of Stripped. It is a very impactful book, and I also focused on making sure that with Stripped, you'll be able to walk your personal finance journey in a personal way that is aligning with your values, because again, like I said, with personal finance, yes, there are some rules on investing, on budgeting. What works for me might not work for you ordinary. So with Stripped, you are able to find your vibe, like they call it, and then be able to build sustainable wealth for yourself. You should get a copy too.
I most definitely will. Thank you very much. You are what we will call here in TVSQ a multi-potentialite. Having done multiple things in the past, exceeding at them and continuing to move forward. It's always very inspiring to listen to you.
Thank you.
On this note, we would like to say a formal thank you for making out the time to join us today on this final episode for the year, and for helping us to unpack issues around gender gaps in the adoption of digital financial services and financial inclusion, generally. I have thoroughly enjoyed, the insights shared over the past 30 to 40-ish minutes, and I thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I say thank you to the entire team too. Happy holidays.
Happy holiday. We would like to say a very big thank you to our listeners for tuning in. We hope you found this episode to be illuminating. As always, the conversation continues on our social media handles. Do remember to send us your comments and thoughts on today's episode. As we sign out on behalf of all of us at Deal HQ Partners and the Simply production team, we wish you a joyous Christmas and a prosperous 2023.
Thank you for listening. This podcast is brought to you by Deal HQ Partners. To find out more about our services, visit www.dealhqpartners.com. See you on the next episode.